My name is Simone Aspis. I'm a Policy and Campaigns Coordinator for the Alliance for Inclusive Education. I've been working at the ALLFIE for 14 years, so I worked on a whole wide range of campaigns, but I've picked just a few campaigns, a whistle-stop tour really around the different kind of campaigns, highlighting kind of the main things, but the main techniques we used, some of the challenges, and what we did to try to achieve the goals that we set out to achieve. We welcome education professionals, we welcome parents, we welcome human rights organisations, we welcome everybody who wants to support ALLFIE's aims and objectives. So we do have people who are on that journey around moving towards their ideas around segregated education to mainstream education. Because at the end of the day, it's people like them who will take the fight forward. If they can highlight for us, what are the weaknesses in segregated education, what the benefits would be if they were included within mainstream. So what we do is we work at policy and legislative work. We don't do individual work. So we don't work with individual people to fight for inclusive education, i.e. if they are individually, supporting disabled, if a parent comes to us and say they're wanting to support their disabled child to go to mainstream school. Whilst we absolutely support of individual campaigns, what we tend to do is there is a lot of advice out there. So we don't actually provide any legal advice on an individual basis. But there's lots of organisations who we kind of work with, like the Independent Parental Special Education Advice, SOS, SEN, CEN. So there's other organisations who take on that work, but we are better suited to do. We also obviously work particularly around policy and legislation changes, because that's where the impact will be. If we can get the policy and legislation right for disabled pupils and students at a strategic level, we are more likely to get it right across schools, colleges and universities, and for individual students and for groups of students. We are the only organisation of disabled people that has a focus on inclusive education, but with the ending of segregation within our education system. So that's where our main difference is between other organisations. So we've set out a list of principles that have been developed by our members, focus groups, and who have been approved by our trustees. So we always work from a collective level as opposed to an individual level. Our principles are our beliefs about what we believe inclusive education is based on. As you're probably aware, you probably find there's lots of different ideas around what is considered inclusive education and what isn't. So this is just a summary of the principles that we have on inclusive education. So ALLFIE has developed this manifesto. We have 6 very doable demands. We believe are very doable demands. These are the demands we do all our campaign work on. So whenever we're engaging with government, whenever we want changes in law, whenever people ask us, what is ALLFIE all about, what do we want changed, we always highlight the 6 demands or asks that we have developed. From time to time, we revise them. We are looking forward to, reviewing them again, particularly for an intersectional lens. So we're really looking forward to doing that in the near future. ALLFIE uses a whole range of methods. So we consult with our members, really important because that helps us to develop and influence policy. So ALLFIE has its own policies, but we use our policies in order to influence what government's policies are. So ALLFIE consults and finds out what what do our members think on certain policies from time to time. That helps us to formulate what ALLFIE's position statement should be. To engage with disabled people, we obviously ask people to support us. Increasingly, we do this through email, but we also have, we've also done lobbying in as well. There's times when we might need to be involved in influencing how education legislation is interpreted by the courts. So we lobby MPs. We also obviously try and influence manifestos where we can. Where we can, we will try and push political parties to sign up to ALLFIE's manifesto. And we also do demonstrations as well, and some form of direct action as well. Not only do we work with government, because obviously we have to influence government policy and legislation, we also have to influence what other public bodies are doing on behalf of around education. So we have done some work with OFQA, which is the qualifications regulator. We've done some work with Ofsted, so we try to influence their policies around inclusive education in regards to how they inspect schools. Institute for Apprenticeships, so we've done some work around there, around influencing the policies around apprenticeships and the apprenticeship standards when they were initially came out. Office for Students, we're starting to do that work with Disabled Students UK, and where we can, we will work with Equality and Human Rights Commission. And of course, we also have to try and influence Department for Education policy. So as I said, we share good practice. We work to the social model disability. We tend to we use our Inclusion Now magazine as the vehicle for promoting good practice out there in the community. So we're not just an organisation just saying, government, you got it all wrong, or segregation's all wrong. We also have to demonstrate good practice, because you know what? Government departments will say to you, where's your evidence for A, things going wrong, and B, what do you want changed? What is the evidence that inclusive education work? And the good thing is, our Inclusion Now magazine is just full of good practice out there. So the first campaign that I thought you might be interested in knowing about is ALLFIE's campaign on the UNCRPD, the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. This convention was developed by disabled people, so Tara's going to say a little bit more about that. The UNCRPD has been signed and ratified by our government, which is really important. And since then, we've had the Reclaiming Our Future Alliance Shadow Report. So we were involved in telling the government, to what extent it has failed, the great failure of this government's implementation of the UNCRPD Article 24, which is the right to inclusive education. Okay, so this is one of the earlier campaigns I did in 2009. Actually, it was probably the first non-school-based campaign that we worked on, and it was on the Apprenticeships, Skills and Children's and Learning Act. So the government tried to set out some national framework for apprenticeships that would cover both the qualification of the apprenticeship, what that would consist of, and occupational standards that were expected to achieve by the apprentices themselves. So the government wanted to introduce a national framework setting out what was considered as an accredited apprenticeship. The first thing they wanted to do was say that all apprenticeships, if you were going to do an occupational apprenticeship, whatever that might be, catering, care, health and social care, engineering, business and admin, whatever apprenticeship we're going to do, but all young people needed to have 5 GCSEs at grade A to C in order to get onto the apprenticeship. There was a requirement to have maths and English and ICT GCSE by the end of your apprenticeship. There was no BSL in qualifications could be offered as an alternative. You had to get an industry vocational qualification in the apprenticeship that you were doing, and it had to be full-time paid employment in order to do an accredited apprenticeship. And the industry vocational qualifications at the time was the National Vocational Qualifications Level 2 for the intermediate level, and for the advanced level was MVQ Level 3. As you could probably imagine, ALLFIE did not take too lightly to this framework. There was obviously issues around the maths and English and ICT, i.e. in terms of, whether young people will be able to get the maths and English. There's absolutely no chance of me getting particularly the English being dyslexic. I got O-level grade U in the industrial vocational qualifications. We were obviously concerned to make sure that the criteria and the standards that were set for the occupations were appropriate for disabled students. We had to engage with Parliament, so we did this for a range of things. So we did engage at second reading and report stage and at third readings. First of all, looked at the research. We had to demonstrate there was a lot of young people that were not engaging in apprenticeships. Also, there were questions around if you were doing health and social care, if you're doing catering, please tell me, what maths and English GCSEs did you need in order to demonstrate the competency on literacy and numeracy required to do that, to do that qualification. So on that one, what we did was we brought in Hertfordshire Pass to work with us, because they were a disabled people's led organisation, and they were actually working with disabled young apprentices. What we had to demonstrate in terms of challenging the inequity around the legislation was that they were, that we knew of young people that wanted to go into the apprenticeship but wouldn't get on one. So we actually phoned up all the colleges, and we in the London area, we were able to get the evidence about the difficulty young people getting on the apprenticeship, and this was just going to make things even harder. We also scouted around for good opportunities to demonstrate that disabled young people were successfully able to get onto apprenticeships without actually having those 5 GCSE criteria. And then what we did was we lobbied MPs and peers in both House of Commons and House of Lords to do this. So we worked with some MPs regards to challenging this, into raising the issues in Parliament, tabling amendments down to the bill for debate. We offered solutions to this. So we said, disabled young people can demonstrate their competencies without having to go through having 5 GCSEs for a portfolio of their work. We also questioned whether actually could maths and English could that be assessed around someone's ability to do that within the context of the industry. If you are doing catering, could you assess someone's ability, their mathematical ability in the context of whatever activities they're doing within catering? And same thing with terms of English around instructions. So we argue very much for a context-based assessment of the young people, because obviously we recognise if people are going into work, they might well require a level of numeracy and literacy skills. And we were saying, actually, if you look at apprenticeships themselves, the NVQ is all very much based on continuing assessment. There is very little examination based. So why are we demanding that at entry level? And therefore we highlighted what the inconsistencies were. Lord Young did an apprenticeship, a post office apprenticeship. How many O-levels do you think he got?
He got none.
and we raised that as an issue. Tar and blood. We were in a meeting with Lord Young, and we asked him, how many O levels did you get? You know, and I think, you know, that was the turning point. You know, when we do our research, we kind of see what we can find out about the ministers themselves, because at the end of the day, what is he doing bringing in legislation like that, where someone like him would never have got onto his prestigious post office engineering and O level. So that was really a start of our campaign, because what we managed to achieve was, first of all, a portfolio of work, but it had to be equivalent still to 5 GCSEs. So we continued with the campaign because we still really didn't want people to have to demonstrate they got equivalent to 5 GCSEs in one way to get onto apprenticeship. And we were still an issue around, you still had to get your maths, English and ICT by the end of your apprenticeship. And we were still very petitious about it and said, look, you know, this is just not acceptable. The government did actually take out both the 5 GCSEs that were required for all young people, whoever they are. It's now for the sector organisations to decide what the entry requirements are to get into the industry. There was still an issue around maths and English still being needed at level 2 or 3 at the end of your apprenticeship. So we still campaigned for that. And what the government have now done, the coalition government has now said, okay, if you have an education healthcare plan, you don't need to get the GCSE level maths and English. You have to get a lower level. And the other important thing for BSL users, they can now get a BSL qualification in lieu of English requirements. And the standards now appear to be much more flexible in terms of the occupational standards for getting the qualifications. Now there is now an endpoint assessment. So there is no longer the continuing assessment. There is an endpoint assessment at the end of the apprenticeship to make sure that young people have met the competencies identified for the apprenticeship. And now we've got an institute for apprenticeships, which is now sitting independently from the apprenticeships unit that was part of the Department for Education several years ago.
Well, thank you, Simone, for your excellent session. I'm still learning what ALLFIE is. It's great. Thank you, Simone.